questions for you. Randy?
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Lawson, I really appreciate you coming and talking to us. And
it's a privilege.
I have a lot of questions to ask, which the Commission knows I always have too many, so I'm going to restrain myself to one or two and maybe more later. But
are they hard? Because I'd like to introduce my colleague.
Well, first of all, I really appreciate you giving the message, and the message I was hearing from you that Fish and Wildlife Service is as disappointed as we are in Idaho with this lawsuit that stopped us from managing. And I think the message I heard you say is that you also agree wolves are fully recovered.
That's right.
And you support hunting, and you support state management, and you think Idaho did everything right to keep its share of the bargain. And I like to hear that message from you, because if we're not doing things right, we'd like to hear that as well. But one of the difficulties we have to decide as a commission, and maybe today, is what we do from here. And one of the decisions we need to make is whether we renew and extend this memorandum of agreement for management that we've had with Fish and Wildlife Services. And as I look at that agreement that was entered into in 2006, it spells out in some detail 12 different obligations that the state of Idaho has. And a lot of those have to do with management and surveys and studies and data and impacts on our populations. And we've got to decide whether we want to continue to be the lead role and try to manage this species that we can't really manage the way we want. And so in looking at that agreement, I'm wondering if we have an option of sitting down with Wildlife Services and trying to renegotiate any of the terms, or is it a take it or leave it matter? And let me point out one of the areas I struggle with. Under B2, basically among these 12 responsibilities that Idaho has is to assume the responsibility of initial contact and response for investigation of any take, including incidental take of a wolf on private or public lands. So the way I understand that, it basically said we're to be responsible for enforcement and responsible for violations. And what this caused the struggle is essentially this. This is a very expensive proposition for Idaho to undertake these responsibilities relative to managing a species that we can't manage. And so we have the ability, when we had the wolf hunt last year, we sold tags, some 29,000, and we're able to generate revenue to help defray the costs of performing our obligations under this agreement. Now we're left in a situation that we can't raise funds to carry out those responsibilities in part. Secondly, we don't have a biological reason to go out and enforce someone for taking a species that we think is fully recovered. And I guess third is do we continue to spend a lot of sportsmen's dollars without a source of revenue that come from other tag sales and species we are managing in order to carry out our responsibility of enforcement? And so if we go through this list of items and decide there's some we can do and some we can't, for financial reasons or for biological reasons or otherwise, if on this particular point too, we would decide, we can't in good conscience carry out our responsibility and spend sportsman's dollars to enforce violations, is that a role that would essentially come back to Fish and Wildlife Service to enforce violations of the Endangered Species Act on a species that you now have to manage because it's relisted? How would you go about handling the enforcement?
Well, your first question was, is this a matter of take it or leave it? And I'll emphasize again, excuse me, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, please.
I'll emphasize again, we're willing to work with you on all approaches. Given the situation that we're in now, where do we go from here? And then on the topic of how to pay for this, I think we also have the commitment that we will look at financing arrangements that we might not have had in the past. After all, once it became Idaho's species, that scheme, that regimen worked, and it isn't working as adequately under the changes that you just described. But the heart of the comment, as I understand it, is who's going to do this enforcement and why should Idaho's? Our perspective is, and Idaho is a sovereign and we respect your decisions, but our perspective is that Idaho is in the best position to make those kind of day-to-day judgments. You're closer to the operations. You can help make priority decisions better than a contracted or federal enforcement role would be. So I don't have a solution for the money. We're willing to look at the terms, but we would encourage Idaho to continue to be the active manager because we're looking to get the species delisted and we want Idaho to be the manager of the species for that, to make that argument successful.
Thank you, Mike. I'll defer.
Thanks, Randy. Other questions for Robin?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes. Tony?
Robin, thank you from my personal perspective for our relationship over the last couple of years, because I know you've had to put up with me at the Western Association, and it hasn't been pleasant. I've continually tried to chew your leg off in an attempt to try to convey the proper message that the frustrated sportsmen that are out there. My question deals with a couple things. One, I'm not sure that your federal rule failed. I think it was maybe a failure of the justice system and one judge that didn't like the rule, didn't like it for political reasons, and threw it back into the political arena. And maybe it's just my personal opinion, but there are no options, no good options out of the mess we're in right now, other than maybe a political option of congressional action at some level to try to rectify what I perceive as this judge's asinine decision. Having said that, I've read the 10J rule in detail, and I'm almost convinced that it was written by at least 20 lawyers when it was written back in 1974. It's unbelievably complicated. It requires the state to do a tremendous amount of research, a tremendous amount of financial expenditure, a tremendous amount of effort to prepare a scientific document that shows that wolves are a huge problem in an area. We have done that for the Lolo zone, 10 and 12, and maybe, I haven't got briefed by staff yet, but maybe a couple of other areas in the 6 zones that we have huge wolf problems in. I know the science lags behind.